Hello, I'm Dr. History Professor, and I'm going to be telling you guys about the history of psilocybin. Psilocybin is an indole, which is a crystalline organic compound with unpleasant odor, base secondary metabolite produced by numerous species of mushrooms. Psilocybin is produced by more than 200 species of basidiomycetes, which grow worldwide and have been strictly controlled legally due to their popularity as recreational drugs. The history of it is Spanish Franciscan Friar Bernardino de Sahagún went to Mexico, aka New Spain, in 1529 and researched the Aztec native people. He compiled the Historia General de las Cosas de la Nueva España, in English, General History of the Things of New Spain. In it, he refers to Tiano Nanacatal, aka God's flesh, the sacred mushrooms of Mesoamerica. Harvard botanist Richard Evans Schultz obtained specimens of 3 species of sacred mushrooms that were identified as Psilocybe cerulescens, Paniculus campanulatus, and Stropharia cubensis. He received a letter in 1952 discussing the ritual use of mushrooms by Mesoamericans in the 16th century. This ignited Watson's interest, and on a trip to the town of Huautla de Jimenez in Oaxaca, Mexico, in 1955, Watson and New York Society photographer Alan Richardson were allowed to participate in a mushroom ritual. Later, in 1957, the Watsons were joined on a follow-up expedition by French mycologist Roger Heim, who identified several of the mushrooms as species of Psilocybe. Heim sent a 100-gram sample of dried Psilocybe mexicana mushrooms for examination by Albert Hofmann, the natural products chemist at Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, who had discovered the effects of LSD in 1943.
Hi, I'm Dr. Heart Doctor. Now that we talked a little bit about the history of psilocybin, we can now talk about how it is synthesized. Psilocybin is created by a fungus, currently for unknown reasons, but primarily consisting within the phylum Basidiomycota in the genus known as Psilocybe. It is derived from a compound called tryptamine, an amino acid, and this compound is a result of complex enzymatic conversions. So, what does this hormone necessarily do, and what compound does it mimic? The known psychedelic compound psilocybin in the active form is known as psilocin. It is a similar chemical structure to the hormone called serotonin, which is recognized by the 5-HT receptor, and many of these are primarily found in the brain and gut. It is also known to have a lot of physiological impacts, including those associated with high serotonin levels. About the cardiovascular impacts of psilocybin. Once ingested, it is dephosphorylated into the active form known as psilocin, which is associated with an increased blood pressure and heart rate. In humans, psilocin causes the 5-HT receptors to be activated. Since psilocin makes them more active, there are some cardiovascular impacts as a result. There is a certain form of receptor of the 5-HT receptors called 5-HT4 serotonin receptors within cardiac cells called cardiac myocytes, in a specific area called the sarcolemma. And the receptor is also known as a G protein coupled receptor, specifically the GS protein coupled receptor. So when this hormone is bound and the receptor becomes active, this causes a cascade that activates the G proteins, which would then increase adenyl cyclase activity and in turn increase CAMP production, also known as cyclic AMP. High levels of cyclic AMP activate protein kinase, specifically CAMP-dependent protein kinase, which modifies proteins used by the heart muscles. One of these modifications is the phosphorylation of L-type calcium channels, also known as LTCC, within the phospholampin, and is the inhibitory sector of troponin. The cascade is then triggered after the phosphorylating of these regions, causing a reaction of the ryanodide receptors, initiating a release of calcium ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the cell cytosol. This allows more calcium to flow into the cells. With the excess calcium in these myocardial muscles, this causes the myofilaments to be activated, which leads to higher inotropy, causing the force of a muscle's contraction within the myocardium to have a stronger contraction. This leads to increased heart rate and indirectly leads to an increased blood pressure. Lastly, it also leads to a quicker relaxation of the heart. This factor is a contribution of the ATPase calcium transport, which causes the calcium to flow really quickly out of the cell. And once the calcium flows out of the cell, the heart can relax much quicker, leading to a faster increase in the contraction right after the relaxation.
Hello, my name is Sai, short for psilocybin. Hang on a moment. Nom 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 nom. All right, let's get into it. Psilocybin has been stated to not have addictive properties and may actually contain anti-addictive properties. Psilocybin has the potential to heal those with suicidal thoughts. It has been linked to decreased depression and anxiety, which has been seen in a study conducted on cancer patients. The results were unclear if this was due solely to the drug or with the combination of the drug and psychotherapy. There have been other studies that have looked into neuropsychiatric disorders such as addiction to nicotine and alcohol that suggest it helps with treating these, although those studies have a small sample size and would need further research to come to a more conclusive result. There is correlation of the 5-HT2A receptors causing disruption to the cortical rhythms and large-scale brain networks through hyperexcitability in the prefrontal cortex. Animal and human studies have shown increased neuroplasticity, increased binding affinity, enhancement of neurotrophic, and decreased depressive symptoms. Studies have shown that when taking psilocybin, the hallucinogenic is triggered through the serotonin receptor activation in the subcortical and cortical structures. The main current findings have seen anxiolytic effects through lowering activity for the 5-HT2A receptor, which was conducted on mice. Increasing the 5-HT2A receptor in the prefrontal cortex correlates to depression and suicidal symptoms. Serotonergic psychedelics are shown to enhance cortical glutamine transmission, which help with antidepressant effects and express more brain-derived neurotrophic factor linked to promoting neuroplasticity. Neuroimaging is showing the potential antidepressant mechanism through reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex and reduced connectivity within the default mode of the network, which is important because increased activity for the two are linked to depressive symptoms. All right, homies, let's wrap this up. Psilocybin has a rich history and is linked to many cultures. As we have stated, it mimics serotonin, which is associated with multiple physiological impacts, such as an increased heart rate and blood pressure, as well as many beneficial psychological effects. It has also been linked to decreased depression and anxiety, but more studies need to be conducted to get conclusive results. All right, have a safe trip, everyone.
Bye.